In a previous video, I talked about some of the newer sanding additions to my shop. One was high-tech, this beautiful SuperMax drum sander. The other was low-tech, a piece of sandpaper glued onto a granite tile. I gave a little bit more attention to the low-tech feature since that's within the reach of everybody. But I'd like to talk more about this drum sander, which I think is really worth every penny. And I did shop carefully, I looked at the reviews, and this seemed to stand head and shoulders above all the others. Of course, you don't know about a tool until you've committed, taken it home, and given it a test drive. I use the sander in various ways. One of the ways that I use it is when I glue up decorative blanks to get particular laminated effects for the bowls. These two bowls are examples of that. They were made from a blank that was cut successively in segments. This one into 16 segments, done half and then a piece inserted, another half and then inserted. It was so arduous that I did the two blanks about 3 months apart. This was less arduous. This was 8 pieces and is a standard glue up that I use. And I also glued up segments here. Once the glue up is completed and everything's dry, you need the drum sander to smooth everything out and make sure that the faces are parallel to each other. There's no other sander out there that will do both faces parallel. Another use that I make of the drum sander is to dimension wood precisely. For an upcoming project that I'm doing for a woodworking magazine, I needed to make a number of replicas of a particular project, and the wood needed to be exactly ½ inch thick. So I had it planed, a bit proud of the lumberyard, and I finished it at home to give me a nice smooth surface. Another use is for dressing wood that has been resawn. If you've ever purchased thin wood, particularly thin exotic wood, you know that you can spend $16 or $17 for a single 2-foot piece of something like Paduke, plus shipping. And that gets to be pricey if you need to make multiples. From a single piece of Paduke that I can buy at my lumberyard, which stocks interesting hardwoods, we can make a large number of pieces, and if I want to go 1/8 of an inch, I can do that. I can size it precisely, and I get gorgeous matching boards. Another use that I put it to is to get matching thin and thick pieces from the same kind of wood. This wood is sapelli. This discoloration had to do with whatever was stored on it, and that will sand out. And you simply cannot get thin pieces of sapelli. So that this is a very practical way of getting the tops and bottoms matching so you can really make it look like it came out of one piece of wood. I did it for pieces of maple, I did it for pieces of walnut. I buy a thicker piece and we just saw it, and if anything really thin is left, I can use it for veneer. Let me duck down and show you for a minute. This sander will sand way, way down. I think the limit is something like 1/32 of an inch. I mean, it's much thinner than I would need. But this gives me essentially thick veneer. And that's matching the piece of walnut that it was cut from. So those thin cut-offs after resawing that are really too thin to use for anything else can be sanded down and become a substitute for what would otherwise be very pricey. And those are only the uses I've come up with so far. So those are the uses I put it to that justified the expense. And this is the sander itself. Having struggled for many years in the community shop with a Delta sander that was in bad repair, but also not terribly well designed, so that adjustments were a real nightmare. What I appreciated with this was that the controls, for example, at this end, if the table is not absolutely parallel, the controls for leveling it are right here, easily accessed, easily done. The adjustment for the spacing between the drum and the conveyor is controlled by this knob up here, where they thoughtfully give an arrow in the direction you have to spin it when you want to decrease the space. And in an emergency, if you decrease it too much, to quickly undo it. But they have also thought of that problem too. There's something here called auto regulation. It's a little red light that goes on when you're feeding it either a little bit too fast or taking off a little bit too much. It slows the process down. To the ear, what you're sanding still sounds normal. So it's very, very sensitive. And the red light says you're pushing it. And I use that as a guide to back off. I think one rotation, I believe, is a 1/16 of an inch. I go about an 1/8 of a turn with each pass, and I find that seems to work pretty well. And there's a gauge here, which can be calibrated. Apparently you can get a digital gauge if you're doing work that's that finicky. I am not doing work that's finicky. And this one works just fine, and it adjusts so you can calibrate it to work, and that gives you a rough idea of where to start. So it's not all looking underneath and trying to figure out how much space to leave. There's a separate motor here, which runs the conveyor. This switch turns everything, turns the main motor on. And this switch here turns the conveyor on. So you have the two. I'm using it with a dedicated dust collector system, and I find that it's very, very good. I did a lot of sanding yesterday, including Paduke, and I don't see a trace of Paduke dust. And if you've ever sanded Paduke, you know, that dust looks like paprika and gets over everything. So that however it was designed to suck it up, you don't get the dust coming off the end as we used to with the Delta. The auxiliary dust collection was a garbage pail that was put underneath. Now you may notice I have no in-feed or out-feed tables on this. They are available as an extra feature, but since my pieces of wood are small, I find that this is such a generous table that I've not felt the need to go ahead and get it, which would give it a bigger footprint. At some point, when I decide on its final resting place, I'm going to configure things so that I don't have to move it around, but they've thought of that too, and have available casters that are excellent heavy-duty casters that hold this rock solid. In fact, sometimes I've forgotten to tighten the casters down and the machine still does not move. It is a very heavy, very solid machine that I believe is the downsized version of really big industrial machines, and that's reflected in this. And when you call for tech support, you actually get people. And you may get the person who worked on this and helped develop it. So that has worked out too. So let me show you how I use it. All right, I'm going to leave my eye protection off, but I will put on my dust mask, and I will put on my hearing, because between the dust collector and this, it gets to be very noisy. And what I do, I'm going to work on the thinner piece, which was resawn. It came out quite square. Sometimes it comes out a little trapezoidal, but that can always be corrected. You know, the rough side up. After I finish smoothing the rough side, I will turn it over. Since the word out on the street is that you're supposed to take off from both sides, I'm not exactly sure if it matters with sanding, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And what I do is I estimate, this is certainly less than a half, but I start out at a half, I start feeding it through, and I rotate it down until I just hear the sanding noise, and I find that that works very nicely for me. The bars, there are two bars here that snap in that hold it in place. Those also move very easily. With the Delta, I was forcing it underneath, and that got to be quite a nightmare. And the adjustments just out of the box seem to be pretty much right on. So let me gear up, and I'll show you how I feed it. completed the sanding. I've done both sides, since it turned out that the other side needed a little bit of dressing and I got that discoloration off. So here you can see is a lovely piece of wood. If I needed a specific thickness, I would dimension it down to that thickness. If I'm not sure just what I need, then I do it just until all the sanding marks are off, so I have the maximum usable thickness. And that's really all there is to it. It really is that easy. It's exactly the way you want it to be able to be used. And because of the open table, it has an adjustment that will let you sand something as wide as 38 inches. That's why it's called 1938. And again, for anyone who's concerned about parallel, because it's open at this end, you have the adjustment that's easily done to bring it to absolute parallel. And that's why I think I'm going to get a lot of mileage out of this machine, and I'm really very happy with it. Thank you for watching my video. I hope this gave you some ideas for your own shop.